High Admiral Scythere stood motionless on the command deck of the HSS Inevitable Victory, his secondary eyes fixed on the holographic display, while his primary set scanned the crew's reactions. 20 cycles of military service had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every nerve in his chitinous body screamed that something was wrong with the scene before him. "Magnification factor?" he asked, his voice deliberately calm. "Standard 10,000, sir," Lieutenant Venn replied, mandibles clicking in barely suppressed amusement. "Would you like us to increase it? The vessels are rather small." Around the command deck, several officers failed to suppress their chittering laughter. The display showed what appeared to be a handful of crude vessels, each barely larger than a standard hegemony trading ship. They moved through the void with what seemed like primitive propulsion systems, leaving energy signatures that any first-year cadet could track. But something about their movement pattern nagged at Scythere's tactical mind. "Play back the last 10 minutes of their course corrections," he ordered, ignoring the subtle wave of disappointment from his crew. They'd been hoping for action, not an impromptu physics lesson. The holographic display rewound, and the vessel's paths were traced in gleaming lines of light. Scythere's antennae twitched as he studied the patterns. The ships moved like they were avoiding obstacles that weren't there, adjusting their courses with microsecond precision that shouldn't be possible with their apparent level of technology. "Sir," Commander Extol approached, lowering her voice. "The Council is requesting our initial assessment of the species' threat level. Standard procedure for first contact scenarios." Scythere continued studying the display. "Run a gravitational analysis of their flight paths." "Sir." Arcstall's antennae drooped in confusion. "They're clearly pre-singularity vessels. The Council merely needs a classification for their records. I suggest Category 7. Emerging spacefaring species, suitable for standard integration protocols." The High Admiral finally turned to face his second-in-command. "Do you remember the Battle of the Crimson Nebula, Commander?" "Of course, sir. Required study at the Academy. The Swarm Queen's forces were decimated by an inferior fleet because they—" She stopped, mandibles clicking in sudden understanding. "Because they assumed the enemy's capabilities based on appearances," Scythere finished. The Queen's analysts missed the subtle signs that the primitive ships were actually automated drones controlled by a far more advanced civilization hiding in the nebula itself. He turned back to the display, extending a segmented arm to trace one of the vessel's paths. "These ships are performing course corrections before they're needed. Their movements anticipate spatial distortions that our sensors don't detect until microseconds later. Either they have predictive capabilities far beyond their apparent technology level, or we're not seeing their real capabilities at all." Arcstall finished, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "Lieutenant Venn," Scythere called out, "run a full-spectrum analysis of the space around those vessels. Look for any anomalies, no matter how small." The young officer's fingers danced across his console, but before he could complete the analysis, a priority message flashed across the main display. The Military Council was demanding their report. Scythere felt his recently healed carapace itch where it had been cracked during his retirement ceremony 3 cycles ago. His last warning about a seemingly harmless species had cost him his original command and nearly his life. The political officers had made it clear that another such paranoid tactical assessment would end his career permanently. He looked again at the strange ships, moving with their impossible precision. Then he looked at his crew, at the young officers who trusted him to make the right decision, even if it wasn't the popular one. "Commander Extol, prepare our report to the Council," he said finally. "Classify them as Category 7, but—" he hesitated, then continued, "add a footnote requesting additional long-range observation before direct contact." "Yes, sir," Arcstall replied, her tone neutral but her antennae showing approval. As the commander moved away, Scythere addressed Lieutenant Venn quietly. "Continue your analysis, Lieutenant. Full encryption, eyes only to my personal database. Something about these humans, as they call themselves, doesn't add up. and I intend to find out what we're missing before it's too late." The young officer nodded and turned back to his console. On the main display, the small fleet of primitive ships continued their strange dance through space, moving like master performers in a ballet only they could see. Later that night, in his private quarters, Scyther reviewed Ven's preliminary findings. The lieutenant had found something extraordinary: microscopic distortions in space-time around each human vessel, so subtle they barely registered on their most sensitive instruments. To most observers, they would appear to be simple sensor ghosts, not worth reporting. But Scyther had seen something similar once before, in classified files about theoretical weapons development. The hegemony's best scientists had proposed that such distortions might be evidence of dimensional engineering, the ability to create and manipulate pocket dimensions in spacetime itself. They had also concluded that such technology was centuries beyond their current capabilities. Scyther encrypted the findings with his highest security codes and deleted all traces from the main system. Then he began composing a private message to an old friend in the Science Council. If he was right about what they'd discovered, the hegemony's dismissal of humanity might prove to be its greatest mistakes since the founding of the Empire. And this time, he intended to have proof before he raised the alarm. Dr. Ixil's laboratory was silent except for the soft hum of quantum processors and the occasional click of her claws against the holoscreen. She hadn't left the lab in 3 days, not since the accident that had claimed her mentor's life. Professor Tskel had been more than just a senior researcher. He had been the only one who took her theories seriously. Now he was gone, and his last words haunted her. "They're not ships. They're doors." The official report called it a laboratory accident. A simple calibration error in the gravitational wave detector had caused a catastrophic system failure. But Tskel had been studying gravitational anomalies around human vessels for months, and he'd never made such a basic mistake. "Display timeline analysis," she commanded, and the air filled with a 3-dimensional graph of the anomalies they detected. The pattern made no sense according to conventional physics. The distortions appeared to precede the energy signatures that should have caused them, as if space itself was anticipating the human's movements. Her comm unit chimed. "Dr. Ixil," a smooth voice said, "the Military Council requests your presence at tomorrow's briefing. Your expertise in xenanthropology could provide valuable context for our first contact protocols." She chittered in frustration. The council had ignored her department's funding requests for years, and now they wanted her input. "I'll prepare a summary of my findings." "That won't be necessary," the voice interrupted. "We simply need you to confirm that the human vessels match known patterns of emerging civilizations. Standard procedure." Ixil's antennae twitched. "And if they don't match known patterns?" The pause was brief but noticeable. "The Council has already classified them as Category 7. Your role is simply to provide supporting documentation." The connection ended before she could respond. Ixil turned back to her displays, mandibles clicking in agitation. Something about this entire situation felt wrong. She pulled up Professor Tskel's personal files, which she downloaded just before they'd been mysteriously corrupted in the system. Most were standard research notes, but one file caught her attention. It was labeled as an old children's game, the kind used to teach larvae basic mathematics. When she tried to open it, the file requested a password. "Computer, display Professor Tskel's last recorded readings before the accident." The numbers scrolled across her screen. At first glance, they appeared to be random fluctuations, but Ixil had spent enough time with her mentor to recognize his methods. He often hid messages in plain sight, encoding them in scientific data that only his students would think to analyze. She spent the next 4 hours running various decryption algorithms against the data. Finally, a pattern emerged. The fluctuations, when mapped against standard spacetime coordinates, formed a message: "Entropy fails at midnight." Ixil's hearts raced. It was a reference to their old joke about entropy being the universe's bedtime story. She entered the phrase into the encrypted file, and suddenly her lab filled with new holographic displays. What she saw made her carapace grow cold. Tiskel had discovered that the gravitational anomalies around human ships weren't random at all. They were precisely controlled distortions in spacetime, creating what appeared to be microscopic pocket dimensions. And they were growing. According to his calculations, each human vessel was surrounded by a network of these dimensional pockets, expanding and contracting in patterns that suggested deliberate manipulation. But the energy required for such technology should have been enormous, visible from light years away. Unless Ixil pulled up the original scans of the human fleet. Their energy signatures were indeed minimal, barely registering on standard sensors. But what if that was the point? What if the humans had found a way to hide their true power consumption inside these pocket dimensions? A soft chime indicated someone at her lab door. Through the transparent panel, she saw two figures in the dark uniforms of military intelligence. Her heart sank. They were early. The briefing wasn't until tomorrow. Moving quickly, she initiated her personal emergency protocols. As the door cycled open, her most important findings were being encrypted and transmitted through her private quantum channel to a secure location. Professor Tiskel had taught her the importance of backups. Dr. Ixil, the first officer said smoothly, "We're here to escort you to an urgent council session." She noticed their hands resting casually on their weapons. "Of course," she replied, equally smooth. "Let me just save my work." As she made a show of organizing her files, a final analysis flashed across her private display. The dimensional distortions around the human ships weren't just growing. They were resonating with each other, creating a network that spanned their entire fleet. The humans weren't just building doors to pocket dimensions. They were building a hidden highway through space itself, right under the hegemony sensors. And no one but her knew. "After you, Doctor," the second officer said, gesturing to the door. Ixil straightened her posture and walked out with all the dignity she could muster. Whatever happened next, the truth was safe. She'd made sure of that. She just hoped she'd live long enough to reveal it. Captain Vexter of the diplomatic vessel Hess Graceful Discourse stood before his mirror, adjusting the ceremonial plates of his dress uniform. This assignment was his chance to shine. First contact with a primitive species always offered opportunities for career advancement, especially when handled with appropriate firmness. "Sir," his aide called from the doorway, "the human delegation is requesting permission to dock." Vexter's antennae twitched in amusement. Make them wait another 10 minutes. Let them understand their place in the hierarchy. But 5 minutes later, his ship's sensors detected an unauthorized docking procedure in progress. Somehow, the human shuttle had bypassed their security protocols as if they didn't exist. He arrived at the docking bay just as the airlock cycled open. A single human female emerged, dressed in what appeared to be casual attire. She carried no visible weapons or defensive systems, not even a basic environmental suit. Ambassador Sarah Chen. She introduced herself with a smile that showed too many teeth. "I hope you don't mind that I let myself in. Your encryption was taking a while to crack, and I thought we shouldn't waste time." Vexter's mandibles clicked in barely suppressed outrage. "You bypassed our security systems." "Oh, those were security systems." Chen's smile widened. "I thought they were welcome messages. They seemed a bit basic for actual defense protocols." The captain felt his grip on diplomatic protocol slipping. "Ambassador, I must protest. Shall we discuss the real reason for this meeting?" Chen interrupted, pulling out what appeared to be a primitive data tablet. "Your military council wants to assess whether humanity would make suitable vassals for the hegemony. You're here to intimidate us with a show of superior technology and military might." She paused, tapping the tablet's screen. "By the way, your battle group hiding behind the system's third moon is out of position. They should be about 30,000 kilometers to the port side if they want to maintain optimal firing solutions on our fleet." Vexter's blood ran cold. That information was classified at the highest levels. Even he hadn't known the exact positioning of the backup fleet. "I don't know what you're implying," he began. "Please, Captain," Chen said, her smile never wavering. Let's not play games. Would you like to see the current positions of every hegemony warship within 50 light years, including the ones running stealth systems? She slid the tablet across the conference table that separated them. Vexter's heart nearly stopped. The display showed a real-time tactical map of hegemony fleet movements that even he didn't have clearance to access. How did you? The same way we've been watching you for the past decade, Chen replied casually. Your civilization isn't as subtle as you think it is. Those automated probe ships you use for long-range reconnaissance. We caught one 20 years ago. Fascinating technology. A bit primitive, but it gave us a good starting point for understanding your capabilities. Vexter's mind raced. No probe had ever been reported missing. Unless you sent it back, he whispered. You studied it, then sent it back reporting nothing but normal space debris. Give the captain a prize, Chen laughed. We've known about the hegemony for quite some time. We just wanted to understand what kind of neighbors we were dealing with before making our presence known. She stood, straightening her simple clothing. Now, shall we discuss the actual terms of our diplomatic relationship? I suggest we start with mutual defense treaties and technology exchange programs. Nothing too ambitious at first, just enough to demonstrate humanity's potential value as an ally rather than a vassal. The military council will never agree, Vexter found himself saying. They've already classified your species as Category 7. Ah yes, emerging spacefaring species, suitable for standard integration protocols. Chen quoted perfectly. Written by High Admiral Skther, I believe. The same admiral who was nearly executed for warning the Council about the Drift Collective before they nearly conquered 3 hegemony sectors. She walked to the viewport, gesturing at her small shuttle. You know what's interesting about that classification? It was exactly what we wanted. It's much easier to prepare adequate defenses when your potential adversary underestimates you. Vexter felt the deck plates shifting beneath his feet. No, not shifting. Vibrating, as if in response to some enormous energy source. But their sensors showed nothing unusual. What are you? He demanded. Chen turned back to him, her smile now slightly sad. We're humanity, Captain. We're the species that looked at the vast darkness between stars and decided to fold it like paper. We're the ones who saw the impossible math of dimensional engineering and thought, we can work with that. And most importantly, we're the civilization that learned it's better to be underestimated than feared. She gestured to the tablet, still showing the hegemony's fleet movements. Your council has 2 choices, Captain. They can accept our offer of alliance and benefit from humanity's advances, or they can continue their current course and discover exactly why we kept our true capabilities hidden. The vibrations increased slightly, and for just a moment, Vexter thought he saw the space around Chen's shuttle ripple, as if reality itself was a pond and someone had dropped a stone into it. The choice, of course, is yours, Chen said pleasantly. Now shall we discuss those defense treaties over dinner? I brought some earth wine. I think you'll find it pairs wonderfully with crow. Dr. Ixil's containment cell was comfortable, as prisons went. The military intelligence officers had been surprisingly polite, explaining that her protective custody was merely a precaution while they verified her research findings. They'd even allowed her to keep her personal data tablet, though its network access had been disabled. What they didn't know was that Professor Tsikel had modified the tablet years ago, adding a quantum entanglement chip that allowed it to communicate through subspace without conventional signals. As she pretended to review old research papers, she was actually watching the crisis unfold through the hegemony's own classified channels. 3 battle groups had gone silent in the past hour. The official explanation was communications disruption during routine exercises. But Ixil had seen the truth hidden in the quantum fluctuations around their last known positions. The humans were testing their capabilities. She pulled up Professor Tsikel's final research notes, now fully decrypted. The dimensional pockets around human ships weren't just storage spaces, they were weapons platforms, staging areas, and sensor arrays all in one. Each primitive vessel was actually a control center for thousands of automated systems, hidden just slightly out of phase with normal spacetime. A soft chime indicated someone at her door. To her surprise, it was High Admiral Skthir himself, looking older and more worn than his official pictures. "Doctor," he said without preamble, "I need you to explain something to me. Our long-range sensors just recorded an energy surge near the human fleet. For a fraction of a second, we detected over 10,000 new contacts. Then they vanished as if they'd never existed." Ixil's hands trembled as she pulled up Tsikel's theoretical models. "They're showing us the tip of the blade, Admiral. Those ships you detected. They're just the ones they allowed us to see." She projected a holographic display showing the complex mathematical relationships between dimensional spaces. The humans aren't hiding their fleet in normal space. They're storing it in artificial pocket dimensions, folded into the fabric of reality itself. Each of their command ships controls a small universe of its own, packed with automated weapon systems and sensor platforms. "Impossible," Skthir whispered, but his antennae showed he believed her. "The energy requirements alone would be astronomical if they were creating the dimensions from scratch," Ixil agreed. "But they're not. They're using existing quantum fluctuations in spacetime, stabilizing them and expanding them just enough to serve their needs. It's elegant, efficient, and completely undetectable unless you know exactly what to look for." The Admiral's secondary eyes narrowed. "Like the gravitational anomalies I noticed during first contact." "Exactly. Professor Tsikel discovered their technique by accident. He was studying quantum entanglement when he noticed that space itself seemed to be folding around their ships. Not dramatically, just microscopic wrinkles in reality. But those wrinkles contained enough space for entire fleets." A priority alert flashed across her tablet screen. Another battle group had gone silent, this time near a major hegemony colony world. The official channels were still reporting normal operations, but the quantum fluctuations told a different story. "They're not attacking," Ixil realized, studying the patterns. "They're creating a defensive grid. Each demonstration is actually them positioning their forces to protect civilian populations, including ours." Skthir's mandibles clicked in sudden understanding. "They're preparing for something. But what?" As if in answer, every display in the room suddenly activated, showing the same image. A human woman in casual clothing, sitting in what appeared to be a comfortable office. "Greetings, citizens of the hegemony," Ambassador Sarah Chen said pleasantly. "By now, your military leaders have noticed some unusual activity around your strategic assets. I want to assure you that these are purely defensive measures, implemented for your protection." She gestured, and the display split to show tactical readouts of hegemony fleet movements. "Your military council is currently preparing a preemptive strike against what they believe to be our primary fleet. I'm broadcasting this message to prevent unnecessary loss of life." Ixil watched in fascination as the space around Chen seemed to ripple, revealing glimpses of vast fleets hidden in the folds of reality. The ambassador's next words confirmed her worst fears and greatest hopes. To the military council, "The fleet you've been tracking is not our Armada. It's our diplomatic corps. What you've witnessed so far has been a demonstration by our equivalent of traffic control ships. If you proceed with your planned attack, you will force us to reveal our actual military capabilities. I strongly suggest you reconsider." The transmission ended, leaving Skthir and Ixil staring at each other in the sudden silence. "Doctor," the Admiral said quietly, "I believe we need to have a very urgent conversation with the Council about the meaning of the word primitive." Supreme Commander Fkol of the Hegemony Military Council stood before the assembled fleet commanders, his carapace polished to a threatening shine. The emergency session had been called after that insufferably smug human broadcast, and he intended to make his position clear. "We will not be threatened by a species that hides behind illusions and tricks," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of hegemony military tradition. Our response will be swift and decisive." High Admiral Skther stepped forward, his newly reinstated rank insignia gleaming. "Supreme Commander, I must object." Dr. Igsil's analysis suggests. "Your pet scientist's theories are noted, Admiral," Cole interrupted. "But we deal in reality, not academic speculation. Our fleet outguns these humans 1,000 to 1. On the massive tactical display behind him, red icons represented the gathered might of 3 hegemony sector fleets, over 10,000 capital ships, each capable of reducing a planet's surface to slag. The handful of blue dots representing the human vessels looked absurdly small in comparison. "The attack plan is simple," V'Tol continued. "3-pronged assault, overwhelming force. No fancy maneuvers, no clever tactics, just raw power demonstrating the futility of resistance." Junior officers chittered in approval, but Skther noticed the more experienced commanders shifting uncomfortably. They'd seen that tactical display before, showing overwhelming odds in their favor. Right before the Battle of the Crimson Nebula. "Time to deployment," V'Tol demanded. "Fleet is in position." "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "waiting for your command." Skther made one final attempt. "Supreme Commander, please. Their technology operates on principles we barely understand. This could be." "The only thing I understand," V'Tol snarled, "is that these primitives dare to dictate terms to the hegemony. Begin the attack." The massive fleet surged forward, weapons charging, drives pushing them to combat speed. On the tactical display, the red mass of hegemony ships began to envelope the small cluster of human vessels. Then every sensor in the fleet went mad. Space itself seemed to twist, reality folding like origami around the human ships. Where there had been empty void, suddenly there were possibilities. The tactical display tried to represent what it was seeing and failed spectacularly, showing ghostly echoes of ships that both existed and didn't exist simultaneously. "Status report," V'Tol bellowed. "Sir," the sensor officer's voice shook, "we're detecting everything. Multiple dimension signatures overlapping. Each human ship appears to be everywhere at once." A new signal cut through the chaos. Text only, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Thank you for volunteering to participate in our combat drone demonstration. For your safety, please maintain your current positions." Before anyone could respond, the space around the human fleet opened. There was no other word for it. Reality peeled back like the layers of an onion, revealing vast armadas hidden in the spaces between spaces. Sleek, automated drones poured out of dimensional rifts by the millions, each one more advanced than the hegemony's best fighters. "Impossible," V'Tol whispered. "No," Skther corrected quietly. "Inevitable. We assumed that because their ships were small, their fleet must be primitive. We never considered that they might have simply found a more efficient way to wage war." The drones moved with impossible precision, forming massive geometric patterns that somehow interfered with hegemony targeting systems. Complex mathematical equations danced through space, turning the very physics of reality into a weapon. "Orders?" someone asked. Before V'Tol could respond, another transmission cut through their communications. This time, it was video, showing Ambassador Chen sitting calmly at what appeared to be a cafe table. Behind her, through a window, they could see Earth's sun setting over an ocean. "I hope this demonstration has been instructive," she said, sipping from a steaming cup. "What you're seeing is approximately 1% of our total automated defense force. We thought it best to start small." V'Tol's mighty carapace seemed to shrink as he watched millions of drones execute perfect combat maneuvers around his fleet. Each formation was a work of art, a dance of technology and mathematics that made the hegemony's finest ships look like children's toys. 1%, he managed to ask. "Of our defensive forces, yes," Chen smiled. "Would you like to see our actual military capabilities? I should warn you, the dimensional distortions can be a bit disconcerting at first." Some observers have reported existential crises lasting up to several days. For the first time in his long military career, Supreme Commander Cole found himself completely speechless. The humans hadn't just outmaneuvered them. They'd redefined the very nature of space warfare, while the hegemony was still congratulating itself on building bigger ships. Perhaps, Skather suggested diplomatically, we should discuss those defense treaties Ambassador Chen mentioned earlier. The Supreme Commander could only nod as he watched his mighty fleet become hopelessly entangled in a web of mathematics and folded space. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest defeat wasn't losing a battle. It was discovering that you never had a chance of winning in the first place. Dr. Ixil stood at the observation window of Research Station Alpha 7, her claws clasped behind her back, as she watched reality tear itself apart. The space around Earth's tiny fleet had become a kaleidoscope of dimensional rifts, each one spilling forth swarms of advanced combat drones that made the hegemony's best technology look prehistoric. Fascinating, isn't it? A voice said behind her. The mathematics of dimensional engineering were actually quite simple once we stopped trying to force space to do what we wanted and started asking it what it wanted to do naturally. She turned to find Ambassador Chen standing there, somehow having appeared on a secure military station without anyone noticing. The human wore the same casual clothing as before, but now Ixil could see the subtle shimmer of dimensional distortions around her. She probably hadn't physically traveled here at all. "You're manipulating quantum fluctuations," Ixil said, her scientific curiosity overwhelming her fear, "using existing wrinkles in spacetime rather than trying to create artificial ones." "Exactly," Chen beamed. "Most species try to bend reality to their will. We learned it's much more efficient to work with the universe's natural tendencies. Like origami, you don't create new paper, you just fold what's already there." Outside, the drone swarms moved in perfect synchronization, forming massive geometric patterns that seemed to twist in impossible ways. Each formation created interference patterns that completely disrupted hegemony targeting systems. "You've weaponized mathematics itself," Ixil whispered in awe. "We prefer to think of it as harmonizing with the universe's own defenses," Chen corrected. "Each drone swarm moves according to equations that describe the natural flow of spacetime. We're not fighting physics, we're dancing with it." A new wave of drones emerged from a dimensional rift, these ones somehow even more advanced than the previous waves. They moved like liquid mercury, their forms shifting and adapting to maximize their tactical advantage in real time. "Those are our newest models," Chen explained casually. "They exist partially in 11 different dimensions simultaneously. Makes them rather hard to hit, as your targeting computers are probably noticing." Indeed, the hegemony fleet's weapons couldn't seem to lock onto the drones at all. Their targeting systems insisted the drones were simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, existing in a quantum state that defied conventional physics. "But the energy requirements," Ixil began, "are minimal," Chen finished. "That's the beauty of working with natural dimensional folds. It's like sailing. Why waste energy fighting the wind when you can harness it instead?" More rifts were opening now, revealing glimpses of vast infrastructure hidden in pocket dimensions. Repair facilities, resupply stations, even what appeared to be entire research and development complexes, all tucked away in the spaces between spaces. "This is why we kept our fleet small," Chen continued. "Why build massive ships when you can store everything you need in dimensional pocket space? Each of our command vessels carries the equivalent of a sector fleet in its pocket dimensions, much more efficient than the hegemony's approach of simply building bigger ships." Ixil's scientific mind was racing with the implications. The dimensional pockets, they're not just storage space, they're force multipliers. Each one can deploy its contents anywhere within range instantly. "Now you're getting it," Chen smiled. "Traditional space warfare is about controlling territory. We decided to control reality itself. Much more efficient." A priority alert flashed across the station's displays. The hegemony fleet's sensors were detecting quantum signatures unlike anything they'd ever seen. The drone swarms were beginning to resonate with each other, creating a cascading effect that threatened to rewrite the laws of physics in local space. "Don't worry," Chen said, noting Ixil's alarm. "We're just demonstrating our basic defensive capabilities. The really interesting stuff happens when we start using offensive dimensional engineering." Offensive dimensional engineering. Ixil's antennae twitched nervously. "Oh yes. Would you like to see what happens when we fold space around an enemy fleet? The effects are quite spectacular, though they can be a bit unsettling for observers in normal spacetime." Before Ixil could respond, new rifts began to open around the hegemony fleet. But these weren't deploying drones. They were folding space itself, creating geometric patterns that seemed to bend reality around the massive warships. "Just a small demonstration," Chen assured her. "We don't want to cause any actual temporal displacement. That would be excessive for a first contact situation." Ixil watched in fascination as humanity's true capabilities were finally revealed. They hadn't just mastered space travel, they'd transcended it entirely, turning the very fabric of reality into both weapon and shield. The age of traditional space warfare was over. The era of dimensional engineering had begun. And humanity, it seemed, had been preparing for it all along. Admiral Sk'Ther watched in stunned silence as the human drone swarms executed their impossible ballet around his fleet. Each formation moved with perfect precision, not to where hegemony ships were, but to where they would be. It wasn't just prediction, it was certainty. "They're not reading our tactical data," he realized aloud. "They're reading our dimensional wake." Commander Arkstall looked up from her tactical display, mandibles clicking in confusion. "Sir, every object moving through space leaves ripples in reality," Sk'Ther explained, his military mind finally grasping the terrible elegance of humanity's strategy. "The humans aren't predicting our movements. They're reading the future state of space-time itself." As if to confirm his theory, a new cluster of dimensional rifts opened directly in the path of his fleet's planned evasive maneuver. A maneuver he hadn't even ordered yet. The drone swarms flowing from the rifts moved like schools of exotic fish, their formations creating complex interference patterns that made conventional targeting impossible. "Sir," the tactical officer called out, his voice shaking, "we're detecting quantum resonance cascades throughout the fleet. Our targeting systems are. They're solving targeting solutions for positions our ships haven't taken yet, then finding those positions already occupied by enemy forces." "Of course they are," Sk'Ther said quietly. "The humans aren't fighting us in normal space. They're fighting us in all possible spaces simultaneously." The main display flickered, and Ambassador Chen appeared again. This time she was sitting in what looked like a comfortable living room, a steaming beverage in her hand. The casual setting made the demonstration of power all the more unsettling. "I see you've noticed our tactical approach," she said pleasantly. "We find it more efficient to engage with all potential battle states at once, rather than waiting for them to manifest linearly." Sk'Ther's military pride finally broke. "How?" he demanded. "How did you develop this technology without anyone noticing?" Chen's smile widened slightly. "Admiral, did it never occur to you that our primitive ships might be small simply because we found a better way? The hegemony builds bigger vessels, adding more armor, more weapons, more crew. We decided to think sideways." She gestured, and the space around her rippled, showing glimpses of vast facilities hidden in dimensional pockets. Why build massive ships when you can fold space itself? Why maintain huge crews when you can have AI systems operating in 11 dimensions simultaneously? Why fight battles in normal space when you can resolve them in quantum probability space before they even begin? The tactical display was becoming increasingly abstract as it tried to represent what the sensors were detecting. Human drone swarms weren't just moving through space, they were moving through possibility itself, appearing wherever a hegemony ship might potentially be. "Would you like to see what happens when we stop playing defensive?" Chen asked. still sipping her drink. I should warn you. The visualization of offensive dimensional engineering can be a bit challenging for organic minds. Some of our early test subjects reported experiencing multiple simultaneous timelines. Before Skither could respond, new patterns began emerging in space around his fleet. The drone swarms were no longer just blocking potential moves. They were creating quantum interference patterns that seemed to cancel out certain possibilities entirely. "We're not actually attacking," Chen explained helpfully. "We're simply adjusting local probability fields to make certain tactical options exponentially less likely to succeed. Much cleaner than actual combat." Skither watched as his mighty fleet became hopelessly entangled in a web of quantum mathematics and folded space. Every possible move they could make had already been countered in dimensions they couldn't even perceive. "I believe," he said finally, "this would be an excellent time to discuss those defense treaties you mentioned." Chen's smile became genuine. "I was hoping you'd say that. Shall we begin with technology exchange programs? We have some fascinating theories about multi-dimensional agriculture that could revolutionize your food production." As his officers stared in disbelief at the casual shift from warfare to diplomacy, Skither couldn't help but laugh. The humans hadn't just outmaneuvered them militarily. They'd redefined the very nature of space combat, while making it look like an afternoon's entertainment. "One question," he asked. "Was any of this actually necessary? Could you have simply forced us to negotiate from the beginning?" "Of course," Chen replied cheerfully. "But then you wouldn't have understood why you needed to negotiate. Sometimes the best way to prevent a war is to demonstrate why it's unwinnable. We thought we were an advanced civilization," Ixil concluded, "but we were still thinking in 3 dimensions. Humanity had moved beyond simple spatial relationships to embrace the full complexity of reality itself. They showed us that the best way to advance wasn't to build bigger ships, it was to build smarter ones." After the lecture, Ixil joined Admiral Skither and Ambassador Chen, or one version of her, in the Institute's observation lounge. Through the quantum-enhanced viewport, they could see multiple layers of reality simultaneously, watching ships move through both normal space and the dimensional folds that now served as highways between stars. "You know what still amazes me?" Skither mused, watching the human transport vessel disappear into a perfectly calculated dimensional pocket. "We never saw their actual military capabilities. Everything they showed us was just their defensive technology." Chen smiled that now familiar smile. "And you still haven't," she said quietly. "What you saw that day was our civilian defense force, the equivalent of traffic control and Coast Guard units, our actual military technology." She paused, considering her words carefully. "Let's just say there are reasons we prefer diplomatic solutions." Ixil's antennae twitched as she processed this information. "The dimensional engineering we've been studying, it's not your most advanced technology, is it?" "Not even close," Chen admitted. "But it's what you're ready for. True advancement has to come from understanding, not just acquisition. You have to learn to walk before you can fold space-time into a pretzel." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the dance of ships through layered reality. The hegemony was learning, growing, adapting to a universe far more complex than they had imagined. And humanity, it seemed, was still several steps ahead, gently guiding their new allies toward a future where the size of your fleet mattered far less than the wisdom to know how to use it. "To new beginnings," Chen proposed, raising a glass of earth wine. "To new dimensions," Ixil added. "To better questions," Skither finished. Outside, reality continued its endless dance, folding and unfolding like cosmic origami, while ships that seemed too small to matter carried the combined knowledge of 2 civilizations through the spaces between spaces. The universe, it turned out, had always been stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. They just needed to learn how to look at it properly.